everybody, it's Brian Asbury, and I just wanted to welcome you to today's episode. If you could, like today's episode, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue to grow the developmentally speaking brand. Today, my guest is none other than former WCW Tag Team Champion and one heck of an amazing artist, the one, the only, Lash LeRoux. Lash, how's it going?
Man, I'm tremendous, Brian. How in the world are you, my friend?
I can't complain, honestly. Everything's going good on my end.
Good, 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 good. Hey, life is grand. It's what we make it, right?
Yes, sir. So let me go ahead and ask you the first question. What made you want to get into professional wrestling?
Actually, to be honest with you, I'm not the guy that dreamed of being a professional wrestler, not because I wasn't a fan or I didn't love it,
Mhm.
just because of the simple fact that I didn't know it was a possibility. I didn't even see it in the stars, so to speak. It wasn't necessarily a dream of mine because I didn't even think it was attainable. The story for me was a strange one, and it kind of happened on a whim. I was a big wrestling fan growing up. I'm a child of the 80s,
Mhm.
so I was right in the middle of Hulkamania and the NWA being really, really hot down here in the South when you're looking at Dusty and the Four Horsemen and Ric Flair and all those guys. So I had the Northern promotion, I had the Southern promotion, and I didn't miss any of it. And I was a huge Hulk Hogan fan, big Hulkamaniac. And then as I got into high school, I came from a really troubled background and childhood. I shouldn't say troubled because I wasn't mistreated in any way. We were just extremely poor. We were very impoverished. And by the time I got to high school, I was already working. I'd worked jobs since I was 9 years old, trying to make extra money on the side. And by my high school years, I was playing sports. I was wrestling in high school. I was playing football in high school. And on top of that, working as many hours as I possibly could to help support my family. And by the time I hit my junior and senior year of high school, I was homeless. I was sleeping behind a cash register in a clothing store at night from midnight to 5 a.m. I'd leave from there. I'd go to school. I was able to take a shower in the athletics department because I was on the football team. After school, I'd have football practice. I'd go home with a buddy, eat dinner with his family, and then go back up there and sleep at the store again. So I didn't have time for wrestling during those
Mhm.
high school years. And it was the 90s, man, and it was kind of a lull in the business anyway in the early 90s. And then about 95, when I graduated high school and started college, you hit 96 and WCW starts exploding. You've got the NWO and WCW starts WCW Monday Nitro, right?
Mhm.
And that becomes a thing. And suddenly my life settled down a little bit simultaneously once I started college and I had some extra time. And WCW caught my eye because all these guys I grew up idolizing were right there in the mix, right? You
Mhm.
had Hogan, you had Savage, you had the Ultimate Warrior, even Sting, Ric Flair, Lex Luger, all these guys. And on top of that, this thing I'd never seen before with the Lucha Libre style and the cruiserweights that were coming in. So all of that, and then the mid card guys that I had never heard of growing up, like Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Eddie
Mhm.
Guerrero, their work spoke for themselves. So top to bottom, that show caught my eye and drew me in. And I had not been watching it maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and they were showing their promos for the WCW Power Plant where they'd have those open tryouts.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, man, I played football in high school. I wrestled in high school. I've tried to keep myself in decent shape. I probably won't ever make it in wrestling, but what a cool story to just drive to Atlanta, try out. Maybe I get to shake Hulk Hogan's hand or something and have a
Mhm.
great story I can tell my buddies back home. And when I got there, the reason why I gave you all the backstory there, Brian, too, is when I got there, man, I realized that this was a 3 day tryout. All the stories you heard about the power plant are absolutely true. It was brutal. It was like a boot camp,
Mhm.
and there was no getting in the ring and learning holds. It was all just calisthenics and squats and push ups and everything else. So you had about 24 guys in a tryout class, guys that were everything from uh, college football players that weren't quite good enough for the next level in NFL
Mhm.
to professional bodybuilders that needed something else on the side to guys that were just homegrown big dudes that had to look like a punk rocker or a biker and they were just naturally 6'8", 400 pounds, So
Mhm.
you had everything in between. And these guys man, once we got in there and you start doing those squats and their legs are locking up and they're getting cramps and they realize that, hey, it wasn't I just show up and they think I look like a wrestler and they want to sign me. This is not a casting call. This is a real
Mm-hmm.
boot camp and a tryout. I looked around and had the exact opposite thought. When I see people falling and giving up and stopping, I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is a gut check.
Mm-hmm.
I've been through some stuff in my life. You may run me off, but I'm not going to quit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so by the end of the first day, there were maybe out of 24 guys, about 16 of us left. By the second day, there was like 8 of us. And by the third day, me and one other guy showed up. And even then, man, they don't promise you'll ever have a job. They
Mm-hmm.
bring you into the office. You sit down with Sarge and Jody Hamilton. And Jody Hamilton, the original assassin, man, he sat there and just told you straight up, said, look, kid, we're not promising you'll ever be on TV. We're not telling you we want to hire you. We're not saying you're going to have a contract. You're not a WCW wrestler at this point, but you showed us enough that if you want to pay us to be a wrestler, we'll train you. So it was $3,000 for training.
Mm-hmm.
My mentality at the time was you pay for any training you get in this world, whether I'm going to finish out college or whether I want to do something vocationally.
Mm-hmm.
So it did not seem out of realm of necessity for me to pay for this training. I had $1,500 in my savings account. I gave them the 1,500. The rest of it I worked off moving furniture at CNN Center because Ted Turner owned that too. And I drove back and forth, man, from here in Alabama to Atlanta, 2 hours there, 2 hours back, 5 days a week, 10 hours a day for about a year before I really started getting some matches, maybe about 10 months before WCW used me on some Saturday night shows. I made sure I was ready. And when I walked out through that curtain, man, I tried my best to get over with fans, whether I'm winning a match or not.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, they started recognizing me. And that's the nutshell story of it. I mean, there's a lot of in betweens and
Mm-hmm.
twists and turns, but for the most part, man, I fell into it.
So when you were training after you were done, was it just automatic? Did they do like dark matches, or was it you were just automatically on TV just to see how you would do? Or
No, I would say three significant things happened for me that gave me my opportunity that I got. The first one was if you were in WCW and you were training there at the power plant, what they would allow you to do is they would give you a heads up. You know, back then they did the TV tapings in Orlando,
Mhm.
and they would tape the Saturday night show about 3 or 4 months worth in 1 week. So you'd have 5 days in Orlando of nothing but TV taping, and they give you a heads up. They go, look, if you're training here, then you're allowed to go down there to Orlando. You can tell them you're one of the trainees. Take your gear with you. And if they need a couple of extra hands, or if they need somebody just to put somebody over or whatever, you know what wrestling fans like to call jobbers. If they
Mhm.
just need a few jobbers, tell them you're ready, and maybe you'll get an opportunity. And so me and a few other guys from the power plant, after I'd been there about 10 months, we did that. We went down there. So my first wrestling match ever was Perry Saturn on WCW Worldwide, which was about a 4 minute squash
Mm.
match. And that was my first time ever on TV. It was my first time ever wrestling an actual official match. And so that was a stepping stone for me.
Mhm.
The next thing that happened for me was WCW was doing a video game with EA Sports, and EA Sports had decided this was going to be the first wrestling game they ever did where they used a motion capture suit.
Mhm.
You know, that kind of became famous when they did the first Lord of the Rings movies. I think they did like Gollum or something with that.
Mhm.
And so everyone was hot on this new technology. And EA Sports decided they wanted to try to do a video game this way. So they came to Atlanta just to film guys in the ring to get an idea. Okay, how could we do this? And I happened to be that guy that, number one, I wasn't shy. I was going
Mhm.
to jump in there and try to get every opportunity I could. And then on top of that, they were looking for somebody that could do all the power moves, power bombs, power slams, suplexes.
Mhm.
Well, I'm a big enough guy naturally. I'm a little bit larger than a cruiserweight, even
Mhm.
though I wrestled mostly cruiserweight. I'm legitimate, about 5'11, 235 pounds naturally. And so I could do all the power moves, and I'd slide in there, do the power moves. Well, we need somebody that could do chain wrestling, Dean Malenko style. They were big fans of that. Well, I wrestled in high school, so I had a legitimate amateur wrestling background. I could get in there and chain wrestle with anybody. Then they wanted somebody that could do all the cruiserweight moves, and I was learning that style because I recognized the only other person that did the lucha libre style at the time that was not Mexican was Billy Kidman.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Billy was on TV all the time. So I went in there and did some of those flying head scissors and drop kicks where I landed on my feet and things like that. And that impressed them. And, springboards off the
Mm-hmm.
ropes and the whole deal. And when they saw that, then the only other intangible was we want somebody that can do all the gimmicks for the guys. Well, I was a big enough mark growing up, and I was young enough that I could do the Ric Flair strut and the Hogan gimmick and imitate those guys. So they went to WCW, EA Sports did, and they said, look, Lash LeRoux is the guy we want to bring up to Vancouver to work on this video game. And initially, WCW said, well, he's not under contract. You might want to get somebody that's under contract. Like, look, we don't care if we have to pay him ourselves. That's who
Mm-hmm.
we think is the best fit for us. So EA Sports actually paid me to go up to Vancouver, and I went on my first trip was about 30 days. Came back home for a few weeks, went back up for about 24 days, came back home, went back up for about 16 days. And WCW, in the meantime, is getting this feedback of the job I'm doing for them up there. And they're thinking, well, this kid must be pretty good if they're so high on him and
Mm-hmm.
they're loving working with him and they think he's so professional. Maybe he's got something. And I was doing during this time the Saturday night shows as well. They were
Mm-hmm.
just booking me to get beat and paying me the nightly and the whatever, right? I was an extra hand.
Mm-hmm.
But that was kind of essentially the only WCW stuff I was doing. And after I got back from EA Sports and doing that stuff in Vancouver, I got a call at the power plant on a Friday. And this was right after they put the cruiserweight title on Billy Kidman. And they were just looking for guys to feed to him to build up his credibility as the cruiserweight champion. And they asked me if I could fly out to Minneapolis on Monday and do Monday Nitro and wrestle Billy Kidman. I go, yeah, of course, absolutely, I can, right? This is what I've been waiting for. So that was my first Nitro debut. And my mentality all along the way, Brian, was that if you're going to give me an opportunity, I'm going to do everything I possibly can with it. And I firmly believe that luck is where preparation meets opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I made sure that I was prepared for that match with Billy Kidman because my mentality, even on the Saturday night shows, was you may tell me I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get beat by Roadblock in 3 minutes or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's fine. Even if I'm not going to get anything in that match, I've got that time from when I walk through the curtain till I get to the ring. That's my time. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
I do with the fans to interact with them and try to get over, you can't really stop, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
TV. And so I had been working this whole time to try to build up my character, try to build up a gimmick, get comfortable in my own skin, so to speak, in the ring. And by the time I had that match with Billy Kidman, man, I had the Mardi Gras beads going to the ring. I had the Raging and Cajun on each side of my tights. So you have to call me the Raging Cajun, whether you know that's my gimmick or not. I'm going to get in the ring. I'm doing the sideburns gimmick already. I'm doing the ooh wee. And they went from thinking, okay, we've just booked somebody to wrestle Billy and have a decent
Mm-hmm.
match to this guy is hitting him. And when he goes down, he's looking at the crowd, interacting with the crowd and ooh wee and healing on him and the whole deal. And to Billy's credit, Billy was such a giving guy and a wonderful person to work with that he was all about giving me a lot in that match and making it
Mm-hmm.
competitive and back and forth because those guys knew, man, if the match gets over, both of us get over in the
Mm-hmm.
process. And if he just beats me the entire time, he's not really winning anything, right? He's not
Yep.
beating anybody. There's no challenge in that. So that was my big Nitro debut, and that was the third little tier that was the point where WCW had kind of recognized that I was bringing something to the table and offering something that they were going to book on a regular basis.
Oh yeah, and that's pretty cool that your journey went that way, and then they're like, "We do have something here," and
Yeah,
let's. So what did they after the Kidman match? How did your career progress? Was it more? We're bringing Lash in, doing this more and more.
well, no, it's ironic because simultaneously while this is happening, I'm finishing up in Vancouver, right,
Hmm.
working for those guys. And the consultant on the video game that WCW had sent up there to kind of be their spokesperson and speak into, an old school mentality of this makes sense to do it this way. And from a
Hmm.
wrestler's perspective, you need this. The consultant up there was Ted DiBiase. So the first time I met Ted DiBiase is when we got booked on that together.
Hmm.
WCW sent him up there. Also, Bobby Eaton was up there doing moves with me because he was just known as being a great worker.
Hmm.
Sarge from the power plant was up there some too because of the same reasons. And I remember getting to know Ted really well up there, and we share a common faith. We're both born again believers and
Hmm.
Christians. And so I remember being frustrated while I'm up there because by this point I'd been at the power plant driving back and forth for about a year. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I had peaked out in my training. You know, I'm not going to get
Mm-hmm.
any better unless I'm challenged and unless I get out of this box that I'm in and actually get out there on the road. And I asked one particular day I was frustrated, and I asked Ted. I said, "Do you mind if I come up to your room when we're done for the day and just talk to you and get some advice?"
Mm-hmm.
He goes, "Sure, kid. Of course. Come on up." And I went and sat down with Ted and explained to him. I said, "Man, I'm just frustrated. I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall because what else do I have to do to try to get WCW's attention?" Right. And I feel like, and I told him, I said, "I'm in the best shape of my life. I couldn't be more ready physically. I'm in the best I'm at the best mental place in my life because there's nothing else that I can't do in the ring, right? I
Mm-hmm.
understand psychology for putting a match together. There's no move set that I can't do. There's nothing I can be asked in a match to perform that I can't pull off. So I feel like I'm ready physically and I'm ready mentally. What else do I have to do?" And he just stopped me. He goes, "On a personal note, are you ready spiritually?" And the reason why I ask you that is once you start on the road, you're going to face some temptations you didn't even know existed, let alone have ever, experienced in your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rock and roll lifestyle. There's going to be drugs. There's going to be temptations with women and all kinds of things that can really get you in trouble and derail your career, especially being young and being immature because I was the youngest guy in WCW at the time. And he said, "Are you sure you're prepared spiritually?" And I said, "Man, I really hadn't thought about that." And I went home, I kind of prayed on it. And I'm not that over the top
Mm-hmm.
charismatic guy where I'm, name it and pray for it and God's going to give you whatever, like he's a genie in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way my faith operates and works. I believe we get God and that's enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But but with that being said, there's some power in prayer as well. And I made sure I prepared myself spiritually for it. And man, believe it or not, simultaneously, WCW calls. I have that match with Kidman. I get a call from my wife. I'm on a Saturday night TV taping, and she said just randomly WCW sent a contract to my house for me to sign. So I didn't care how much the contract was for or what it was going to be. It's like, man, they're offering me a contract. I'm going to sign it.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and got that contract simultaneously. And after that match with Billy Kidman, they never set me down. They never
Mm-hmm.
said, "Dude, we like what we see." They never said, "We're impressed." They never said, "Don't go back to the power plant." They just started booking me. I just started getting airline tickets to my house and I started getting booking sheets like the rest of the boys did. And being young and being inexperienced and just trying my best to look as professional as I can, I just rolled with it. This is what they expect out of me. I'm going to show up to work and do my job. And that's how it progressed for me. And you just become part of the roster and you just become one of the boys and you're just on the road after that.
That's I couldn't imagine traveling like back then because everything is so convenient now. But now, like
Sure.
having to get, your tickets and all that, I'm sure that that was just like your mind's just.
Hey, funny story, man, is like I said, I started in the business super young. I was like 18 when I signed with WCW or 19. And then, I retired by the time I was like 32, So I was in and out of the business pretty quickly from that standpoint and at a pretty young age. And you're exactly right. In the late 90s, what would essentially happen is they would FedEx you your airline ticket and they would FedEx you a booking sheet. And all the booking sheet is a list of the dates and the arenas with the address to the arena on it. That's it. That's all the information I have. The rest of it's you in an atlas, basically, right? And anything over 300 miles, they fly you, and anything under 300 miles, you drive. And so you would have these loops. So
Hmm.
you had to find these buildings. You had to take care of your other travel when it comes to your hotel and your rental car and all that kind of stuff. And you're exactly right. It was all old school. You just make calls and you make reservations. And I found out really quick, I had to wake up call for me. I'd never been out of Alabama, man. And the first trip, I fly into a town and I'm trying to look professional. And I go up and I go to rent a car and they won't rent me a car. I'm too young. I'm under 25 and they won't rent me a rental car. And I look over and somebody's laughing at me and it's Scott and Steve Armstrong and Brad Armstrong. And they let me jump in with them, man. And I start traveling with them and they sort of become my travel buddies and my mentors and my friends. And I gravitated towards those guys and loved every minute of it. But then fast forward, The last time I really traveled significantly like that was flying out was early 2000s, or
Mm-hmm.
so. And just in the last couple of years, the last year or so, I've started my business that I do now with my caricature work has really taken off.
Mm-hmm.
And I get booked out to do a lot of conventions now where I fly out for 3 or 4 days and I'm at someone's kiosk in their booth and I'm drawing digital caricatures for them. And they have found that I really draw people to their booth and it's great business for them
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes people just want that caricature and they love my artwork. And then other times they get a lot of these guys will show up just because they remember me from wrestling and they want to get their
Mm-hmm.
picture taken with me. And so now I'm traveling again like I did before. And this is now post 9/11, and this is
Mm-hmm.
also post the internet and everything being online, man. And I'm seeing the difference now. I can make all my reservations on my
Uh-huh.
phone. I can scan it. I don't even need a boarding pass, man. I just show them my phone. It's crazy. Man, if we'd had this back then, it'd been so easy.
Oh yeah. Was there any fond memories in WCW? More some that stand out more than others?
You know, not really. I loved every bit of it,
Mm-hmm.
man. I was that guy and maybe some of it was just being young and being naive, but I wasn't caught up in the politics of it. The older I get, what I miss most of all is just the camaraderie. I miss the
Mm-hmm.
fraternity and the brotherhood. I miss the guys in the back and hanging out and traveling with them as much as I miss the wrestling matches and the performing in front of
Mm-hmm.
fans. Um, there's a few wonderful memories there and cool things I got to do that I don't think about very often. And then someone will mention something and they'll pop up in my mind. I go, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And it may be something like Kiss performing at a Nitro, or it might be, and you meeting them and working with them backstage, or it might be like someone sent me a clip a few weeks ago, as a matter of fact, where, if you remember, and you might even be too young for this, there used to be a show on Nickelodeon called Double Dare,
Uh-huh.
and it was kind of a obstacle course, right? And it was a kids obstacle course show, a game show. And me and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Jerry Toot, who wrestled as the Wall with us in the MIA, and Vito, Big Vito, were all on that with some kids, and they teamed us up with some kids, and we did Double Dare. Man, I forgot all about that. Things like that get reminded to me. The Australian tour that we did was phenomenal and
Mm-hmm.
awesome. What other opportunity you're going to get to go to Australia? You know, things like that looking back you go, it's a cool ride.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, Brian, is when you're young you don't appreciate things in the same way, but also when you're right in the middle of it, wrestling is so compact and it's so tiny, the fraternity there, of people that's actually involved in it. And
Mm-hmm.
when you're on the road 300 days out of the year, it almost becomes a blur. You're so busy wrestling this match and getting to the next town, and then making sure you're prepared for that match and getting to the next town and finding a hotel and finding a gym and eating and all that stuff, that you almost don't have time to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you're in a town, it's time to go to the next town.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone goes, oh, it must have been cool to go to 32 different states in one year. You go, well, dude, after a little bit of time, there's only so many ways you could build an airport, a hotel, an arena without it all starting to look the same.
Oh yeah, and you said the environment of everything. I did a little like production work for a couple of companies with Evolve and Dragon Gate before WWE bought them out. So
Yeah.
so I've got friends that still wrestle on TV and stuff, and when they send tickets, like I don't go to watch the show. It's the environment. It's the atmosphere. It's just you know what I mean? Like just wrestling. What just the atmosphere is amazing, and I can relate with that.
Amazing. It also ruins you for everything else. And what I mean by that is if you've done some of that production, then you'll relate to this. My wife loves to go to concerts. She
Hmm.
loves live music and she likes going to concerts, and she wants me to go as often as I possibly can with her. Dude, I don't enjoy concerts unless it's an artist that I'm really into, because I don't see the stage and the lights and the production. I see the cases that are right there off to the side that all the production stuff is in,
Hmm.
right? I
Yep.
see it's like a magician going to see a magic show, and you know how they do all the tricks. A lot of the magic has been ruined for me. Now I
Hmm.
love the environment because it reminds me of being
Hmm.
backstage, but I'm used to being on the other side of that guardrail, so to
Yep.
speak. And
Hmm.
it's just a different animal. It's just
Hmm.
a different animal, and it changes your perspective.
Oh yeah. So when WCW closed its doors, you went into WWE for developmental for a little bit. Was it a pickup right away, or was there a little bit of time before they they signed you to your developmental deal.
No, it was horrible. It derailed my career. And what I mean by horrible is this is not me sowing bitter roots or
Mm-hmm.
anything. And I'm not calling anybody out individually, because perspective is an awesome teacher, right? You get
Mm-hmm.
older and you look back and you can see things how they really were as opposed to how you felt in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, nobody knew what to expect. And in the moment, I can only go by what they're telling me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when WCW was bought out, nobody at WCW knew how this thing was going to pan out. They didn't even know that Vince was buying the company until the night it happened. The way I found out that WCW was purchased by WWE is the same way you did. I was watching the show live and watched Shane McMahon walk out because I wasn't there. And so that's the blind side aspect of it. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
wondering, okay, I got a lot of unanswered questions. How's this thing going to go? And I sat at home for about 2 weeks. I'm still getting paid. I'm just trying to be patient, waiting things out. And I get a call, and it's Johnny Ace. And I answer the phone, and he goes, Lash, we got good news and we got bad news. All right, Johnny, what's the good news? Or what's the bad news? I'm a bad news first type of guy.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, the bad news is Vince is only interested in 24 guys from WCW. Okay, what's the good news? Well, the good news is you're one of them. All right, Johnny, what do I need to do? Just sit tight. We'll give you a call in a couple of weeks. We'll let you know what's going on. So, in principle, I kind of know that I'm in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be in the mix. And then a couple of weeks later, Johnny calls me back, and he's trying to give me an update. So I say, okay, well, how does this work, Johnny? Do I need to sign a WWE contract, or do I? No, Vince is just going to absorb your WCW contract. Just keep doing what you're doing until we call you and we're ready to bring you back out on TV. Okay, no problem at all. So I'm sitting at home during this time, and probably 4 or 5 weeks are going by, 6 weeks are going by, and in the meantime, I'm about to roll over to my final year of my WCW contract, where I'm gonna really start making some substantial money because I've built myself up by this point.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny gives me a call the Friday before the Monday that contract is supposed to roll over. And he goes, Hey, Lash, Vince wants you to sign a new contract. Okay, no problem. No big deal. My mentality had always been, right, I'm living a dream, brother.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I told you a little bit about my childhood growing up. So once I'm an adult, I feel like I'm playing with house money. My
Mm-hmm.
life is never going to be as bad as it was then or as difficult as it was then. So I'm not greedy, man. I don't have to be a multi-millionaire. I just want to be comfortable, pay my bills, and do what I love to do. So I didn't care about the numbers too much. And he called me up and he said, Look, the reason why Vince wants you to sign a new contract is their contracts are structured differently. Unless you were just a special circumstance in WCW, you got paid a set salary for the year. You
Mm-hmm.
didn't get any residuals or extras or anything else, any draws off of gates. The only extra money you got for WCW was off merchandising. But your guaranteed contract was a little bit higher than it might be if you're in WWE, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in WWE, you get much less on the downside, but the upside, there's no ceiling to it because you get draws off of gates and you get residuals and you get everything else. So Johnny calls me to explain all this stuff to me. He goes, he wants you to sign a WWE style contract. Sounds good to me. And Johnny, his words to me were, Look, Lash, you are a workhorse in WCW. You're on every show. So really, we use you like that at WWE. You're going to make more money at the end of the year anyway. And I'm going, well, whatever. I'm not greedy. No big deal. Dude, I took $100,000 pay cut when I signed a new contract with them. $100,000 pay cut. And then the next week after I signed a new contract with them, they called me up and asked me to go to Cincinnati for 4 weeks. Now, when I signed the contract with them, and this is the misunderstanding, and I laid the groundwork to kind of point this out, is a lot of people think because of how it went down that I got signed to a developmental like a lot of those guys in
Mm-hmm.
WC. I did not. I signed a WWE talent contract. It was not a developmental contract. They never spoke to me about going to developmental. They never told me I needed to go to developmental. I didn't even know what developmental was as a
Mm-hmm.
concept at the time. I just knew they had some training centers
Mm-hmm.
similar to WCW. And the way that it sold to me was when Johnny Ace called me back, he said, Look, we want you to go up to Cincinnati for about 4 weeks, help train some of those guys because you're a great worker, and you may even be asked to drive across the way there to Louisville and help train some of those guys because in Louisville at the time there was a few guys there you might have heard of. Dave Batista, Randy Orton, Brock Lesnar, and John
Mm-hmm.
Cena all kind of came through at the same time, and it was during this era. and they were going to ask me to go back and forth a little bit for 4 weeks, is how it was sold to me, till WCW, the writers and creative, had a way to bring the Raging Cajun back out on TV,
Mm-hmm.
because he said Vince liked the character already. They weren't asking me to change anything or nothing. So I said, well, that sounds good to me. No problem at all. And I said, so you guys send me a ticket. What's the deal? And Johnny's just offhandedly said, well, you might want to drive up to Cincinnati because it'll save you money on a rental car since you're going to be there for 4 weeks. Probably a smarter deal for you. Okay, I had no problem. I'll drive up there. So I drove up to Cincinnati thinking I'm going to be up there 4 weeks. Dude, it turned into 9 months, and it was 9 months with no end in sight, and there was
Mm-hmm.
no 9 months with no light at the end of the tunnel. And very quickly I realized they're expecting me to be up here all the time. They're expecting me to live up here and to
Mm-hmm.
train every day. And now I've taken $100,000 pay cut, and I'm really working more if you count my time in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I'm 7 days a week almost. Well, really, to be fair, we would do training on Monday through Thursday. I would have Friday off. I would drive 8.5 hours back home on Friday night, get in about 2 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning. So I would have Saturday with my wife, and then have to drive back to do a show that night, 8 hours that I'm not getting paid for. And none of these were considered WWE shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm getting my bottom very minimum, right? And I'm having to pay to live in Cincinnati. I'm having to pay my bills back home, and I'm not making any extra money. And I was miserable up there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the only time in my life that I really psychologically sort of cracked and didn't care anymore. And in hindsight, being 2020, I look back, man, I was young. I was in my early 20s. I wasn't smart to the business. And what I
Mm-hmm.
mean by that is, I look back on my career and I realized I didn't know the wrestling business. I knew how to work, I knew to
Mm-hmm.
have great matches, but I didn't know the intricacies of politics and needing to recognize, okay, you're put in this position, you've got to prove yourself before WWE is just going to put you on their main roster.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize any of that. I thought I had proven myself with my WCW track record.
Yep.
So all that stuff builds up some resentment and bitterness, and you're not performing at your best, and you're not taking care of yourself, and you start spiraling down a little bit, and that makes you look even less appealing to the front office, right? And you tell yourself, well, nobody likes me, or it's politics, or it's this, or it's that. Dude, I get older now. I look back. Nobody was out to get Lash LeRoux. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
nobody was punishing me for anything. It was just the way that the cards fell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I look back and they had 12 world champions at the time under contract. If you count everybody from a Kevin Nash to a Scott Hall to a Taz to a Jerry the King Lawler to on down the line, of course they don't have time. They don't have room for me on the main roster.
Mm-hmm.
But I was too naive and too immature to realize that that was the case. And so I didn't make the most of that opportunity because I didn't see it as an opportunity.
So what led to you? Was that what led to your release, or they just call and say it was a budget cut, or?
Well, it was the same sort of thing and it was the same kind of disorganization
Mm-hmm.
because I was seeing the writing on the wall. I was miserable. Matter of fact, they went through a little phase there to give you some flavor of how I was acting at the time. They went through a phase there where a few guys were popping for taking steroids and things like that, or just taking drugs. And so they began drug testing us constantly. And every week they would weigh us in and check our body fat percentage, right? And so I came in and I was miserable and I was losing weight just simply because of stress, not
Mm-hmm.
because of anything else. So while these other guys were really trying to make a good impression on the front office and they're sweating bullets at the weigh in and the checking my body fat and everything else, I'd walk in with a cappuccino and a honey bun. And I would step on the scale. I go, hey, look at that, boys. I'm down 5 pounds again. You know what the secret is? I'm eating 9 meals a day. Now, every meal is a honey bun and a cup of coffee, but I'm getting my meals in. You need to follow. That was the way that I was acting, man. And so I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And when they came to evaluate some talent, and sitting in a room there was a few guys from the office and Johnny Ace and Dr. Tom Pritchard. And Johnny Ace, I knew, was letting some people go at the time. And I kind of expected it. But in the back of my mind, keep in mind, I'm remembering I don't have a trainee contract. They're treating me like I'm a trainee.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a 3 year guaranteed deal that I have signed with them. There's no cut clause in there. There's no 90-day nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And So because I at least made sure I was protected on that end because I'd taken such a huge pay cut.
Yeah.
So I go in and I sit down in there, and and Johnny breaking it to me. He's going, "Well, Lash, Vince really doesn't want to continue doing business right now, but there may be a time in the future you can come back and blah blah blah." And to his credit, Dr. Tom Pritchard, who is just aces, man, and always has been, always will be, he stopped it. There's no advantage for him doing this, and there's nothing he's going to get out of it. And in fact, there was nothing he was going to say that was going to stop this process from happening.
Mm-hmm.
But he still spoke up for me. He goes, "I just want to be the one to say that I think you're making a big mistake if you release Lash LeRoux. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think he's got a lot of potential. And I don't think that he's somebody that we want to get rid of." And so I've always held Tom in a very high regard because of that. I appreciate him and admire him and think the world of him. He's just that kind of guy that says what he believes is right,
Mm-hmm.
no matter whether it's popular or whether it's politically motivated or not. And they wanted me to go to Puerto Rico. WWE did. Thought maybe I could brush up on some stuff there and then come back and maybe a little bit later. But at the time, in my mind, I'm thinking they killed Brody. I don't have a chance at Puerto Rico, right? So I didn't go to Puerto Rico. Plus, I was just I was hurt, man, and I was bitter and I was broken a little bit. And I came home and I did some stuff in Germany for a while and did some tours over there, which the people in Germany loved me, and that was fun. And I did some independence and did some different stuff, but I progressively from that moment on, I could feel my career sort of on a downward spiral because I didn't know what to do with myself.
Mm-hmm.
I did some stuff in TNA, but if you look at that TNA stuff, I was out of shape. I didn't look my best. I didn't make the most of the opportunity. I didn't know what was next.
Mm-hmm.
I thought if you worked hard and you showed up, people would do something with you and you'd be a good hand. And I was so young, man. I did not know how to market myself, get myself over, and make a spot for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, it just eventually the injuries started catching up on me. Uh, the difficulty of just being booked and that grind. I never liked haggling the money. I like you telling me how much you're going to pay me. Let me show
Mm-hmm.
up and let me have a great match for you, and
Mm-hmm.
let me come home. I don't want to have to deal with the other aspects of it. I don't have to convince you that I'm worth this amount or that amount. And so, long story short, man, about 2010, I did a show in Alabama. I was booked on the show against Bull Buchanan, and I love Barry. I knew we'd have a great match, and I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, Barry, I'm retiring tonight." And he goes, "Okay, sure, man," and patted me on the back. And I didn't cut a promo. I didn't say anything to the fans. We went out. We had a great match. I rolled out of the ring and have never laced up a pair of boots since then. I was never going to be that guy that was going to say, "Okay, I'm in the business. I'm out of the business." That's the reason why. If for anybody that's followed my career up until I started doing the podcast, the video podcast I'm doing with Time Limit Draw, nobody's really seen me or heard
Mm-hmm.
anything about Lash LeRoux for probably a good 10 years. I was just a ghost. No, people didn't even know how to get in touch with me. And so, and that was purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to tiptoe in and out.
Mm-hmm. So how has life been since leaving wrestling?
It's great, man. I love where I am now. Somebody told me early on, and I didn't get it at the time. They said if you really want to be successful in the wrestling business, especially if you want to impress Vince McMahon in the wrestling business in WWE, you always do really well if you step out of the wrestling business, find some success in some other aspect of your life, and then come back. And the reason why is this: I really believe that dovetails in with some great advice I got from Brad Armstrong one time. Brad told me, he goes, you got to be careful, Ash, because the wrestling business will make you think less of yourself sometimes. It'll make you feel like a superstar and feel like you're the greatest thing in the world one day. And the next day, you will feel like you are worthless. And the only reason why you were ever booked is because somebody liked you, or if I don't have a friend I can call, I'm never going to get another match. I mean, if you've been around it in any amount of time at all, you know exactly what I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about. Well, what I was able to do was I took all of that hurt and resentment and bitterness and I let it go. Man, I got outside of wrestling. I said, okay, what are the things I'm good at and what am I talented with, man? And I cultivated my artwork and I grinded at that and I started at point zero again. And I found some worth and I found some value. And it reminded me being good and being successful with my caricature business and what I'm doing now and getting it to a level where I'm making as much income off my caricature work as I ever made off of wrestling. And so I'm able to go, okay, I didn't get lucky. Mentality in your life, especially if you start young and you find some success in your young age, and you start thinking to yourself, well, maybe I'm second guessing this. Maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I got a great break. Maybe I was in the right place at the right time. And maybe it was not that I was just that talented. I just had the cards fell into place, and stepping away from wrestling, reevaluating myself, and finding some success in something else outside of wrestling made me realize that, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way. I mean this in a very self gratifying growth way, man. Is I was able to look in the mirror and go, no, man, you really are that good. You really are talented. You really are bringing something to the table. You really earned every opportunity that you got, and you deserve to be where you were. And that's amazing. That's a good feeling to have. It's extremely gratifying, and it's extremely uh, it's just, I don't know, man. It feels really really good to be in a place where you can look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, man, everything I've got I've earned, and I got it honest, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't beat anybody out of it, and I didn't steal it, I didn't rob it, I didn't cheat it from anybody at all, man. I just earned every bit of it. And because of that, nobody owns me, man. I don't have to worry about whether or not a promoter's going to book me.
Mm-hmm.
I build up all my own business. People are calling me. My phone's ringing off the hook. I probably have a dozen different companies at any given time that will call me just to ask if I'm available for these private events that I do, whether I'm available for conventions or anything else, man. So my calendar stays filled up. It's a lot easier to be booked doing this than it was with wrestling.
Where can people reach out to you at?
It's pretty straightforward, man. It's pretty easy. The only social media I have now, after being a ghost for 10 years, when I started the podcast, I picked up Twitter just because I felt like I needed some kind of social media outlet. So they can find me on Twitter at LashCanDraw. That's that double entendre for anybody that said I couldn't draw in professional wrestling. Well, not only am I a draw, but I can physically and literally draw. So I do that, and then I also have the same email address I have had for 25 years, lashwcw at AOL.com. Obviously, I'm still holding out that merger is going to work, right? No, I'm just, but and then I'm currently working on a website. That website will be lashcandraw.com. Once it's up and going, it's under construction even as we speak. And so I stay booked out all the time. If anybody's in the Southeast that's within my service area, or if they want to fly me out and pay for my travel expenses, I do a lot of private events and corporate events. Uh, what I do, to be a little bit clear for those that may not be familiar with it, is if you've ever been to a fair or a festival or a theme park where they have the booth set up and people do the caricatures where they draw you in a cartoon version that looks just like you within the span of about 5 to 6 minutes. That's what I do. And people will book me out on college campuses, corporate Christmas parties. I do wedding receptions all the time, man. And of course, me being an ordained pastor, I can marry you and draw at your caricatures if you want to. But but anyway, I do a lot of weddings, and basically they pay me for my time. And what I do is I come in there, I bring all the supplies with me. I draw about one face every 5 minutes, and that's given out to the guests as a gift that they can take home with them. And when I do the corporate events, I also do a digital version of that where I'm drawing directly on an iPad. I have a big flat screen TV behind me, and when I print it out, it prints out a 4x6 full color, and you turn it into a lanyard and a name tag. And so these corporations bring me out to their conventions and trade shows because if you've ever been to one of these large trade shows, the competition is, can I drive more traffic to my booth than the other person driving to their booth, right? Because those are
Mm-hmm.
your potential sales. So each one of those name tags has their company's information at the bottom on a banner, and the person's wearing that constantly because it's their caricature. So now their name tag basically becomes their caricature, and they're advertising for you all around the expo the whole time that they're there, and they're pointing people back to your booth to get their own caricature drawn. And so those pay really, really well for me. They fly me out. I usually do 2 or 3 days with that. I'll be going to DC, as a matter of fact, the first week of May. I'll come home for a week and then I go out to St. Louis for a week, doing that sort of thing. And love it, man. I just absolutely love it. I found my wheelhouse, and it also sort of scratches the itch that I miss in wrestling. Until I started doing the podcast, the 60-minute time limit draw with Lash LeRoux, that it's on adfreeshows.com. Until I started doing that again, one of the things that I really missed about the wrestling business that I didn't realize I missed was the interaction with the fans. And so I get a lot of interaction with the people when I do these live events now. They're asking me wrestling questions. I'm talking to them about that while I'm drawing them. And it's just very awesome. And it's great way of sort of remembering all the wonderful things about my career.
That's amazing. Lash, I just want to thank you for coming on today. I want to say thank you for what you've done for professional wrestling and what you continue to do. I hope that we can do this again sometime.
I'll be happy to do it, Brian. You've been wonderful to me, man. You are a gentleman and a scholar, and it has been fun for me as well. Just remember, we want to laisser le bon temps rouler. We let the good times roll.
Thank you again, Lash. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, brother.